Hi guys and welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, my name is Emma, or Emily, who's to say, and today I'm going to be talking about the books I read in July.
Okay.
The first book I read this month was The Poet X, and I listened to it via audiobook. I gave this book 5 stars. I really loved it. I loved the poetry. I loved that Elizabeth Acevedo narrated it herself. As you guys know, really enjoy it when authors narrate their own books in their audiobooks. I just think it's really great, and that way they know how certain words should be emphasized and stuff like that, and it's really great, especially in poetry. What?
How certain emotions should be portrayed, you know?
Yeah. The next book I read was Normal People by Sally Rooney. I really enjoyed this book. I loved that it took place in Ireland, and it was really great because I visited Dublin, and that's where the college that they go to is, and so seeing a couple of the same things, and at one point they go to the same bar that I went to when I was there, and it was just really cool to see that. I also absolutely loved hearing or reading or watching, I don't know, CONNELL talk about literature itself. Another YouTuber I watch, why can't I remember his name? I will put a little thumbnail somewhere, but he reads all of the books that CONNELL reads in the book and in the show, and some of it is a little bit up to interpretation because it'll just say a collection of stories by a certain author or something like that. So it kind of isn't super set in stone, but he reads all of the books, and that was really interesting to watch, so I'll have that link down below as well. But yeah, just hearing CONNELL talk about literature was really great. It was just really fun. I absolutely loved it. I love hearing other people talk about books, and so it was really cool. The next book I read was Camp by Elsie Rosen, and I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. There were just a couple things that I didn't entirely like. The counselor was, I don't know, it was just a little bit weird. His advice was very particular in the sense that he was like, well, this gay boy is lying to himself because he's not acting flamboyant, because he wants to be, masculine. And while, maybe that's true, but some gay people are they just have different sexual preferences, but they're not, acting a totally different way. They shouldn't be forced to do that. And I thought it was weird that the counselor was like, it's just a lie. He's just lying to himself. And it was kind of or maybe he can like sports. I don't know. It was just kind of weird, and I didn't like that talk. But overall, I really liked it. I felt all warm and fuzzy inside. It was really sweet. It also reminded me a lot of camp, just the camp songs and making up skits last minute, and it was just super fun, and it reminded me of camp a lot. Also, this book and a few others are in a vlog that I did, and I'll have that linked up there if you want to check that out and get more of my in-action thoughts or whatever. The next book I read was Felix Ever After by Casey Calendar, and this book is 5 stars, and it's one of my new favorites. I absolutely loved it. It follows Felix, who is a trans, queer, black boy, and he is going through a lot, and his last name is Love, and he thinks that's super ironic because he's never fallen in love. Throughout this book, you follow him just sort of coming to terms, still trying to figure out a little bit. He's had top surgery, but he's still a little bit unsure of himself, and there are also some photos leaked of him before his transformation and his dead name too, and it is really sad to read that, and just to see that someone would do that, and he's trying to figure out who did it, and he thinks he knows who, and so he's trying to find out secrets of theirs too, and he's basically trying to get revenge. It's really interesting, and I really liked how it was done, and it was just so good, and it was so fun to read. It was also very eye-opening because I am not trans, and I didn't really think about all of the little ways that someone could be transphobic, but there are so many different ways, purposefully using the wrong pronouns, or dead naming them, or just other ways. There are certain things, and I can't say what they were because it would be a spoiler, but certain things that characters said, and it was I didn't even think that people could think that way. I didn't even think that someone could say that, and it just, it just opened my eyes a lot to all of the different ways that people can be transphobic. I also really like that Felix isn't the perfect character. He's not always in the right, and he's kind of hot-headed. He gets angry really easily, and it's really fun to read about because he's not like a perfect mild character, but he's got like some mild qualities, and then he's got some like feistiness, and then he's also a painter, and it's so cool to watch that. He paints mostly with acrylics. I like painting in general, and I loved his development in art as well. The next book I read was The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I gave this book 5 stars as well. It was a really big surprise for me. This book came out in like 2011, and just books that came out in that time aren't always spectacular. I thought it was really cool, and I loved all of the history and the supernatural elements that came with that, because it didn't feel like super spooky and whatnot. It felt just like a sort of fantastical history sort of thing, and having Gansey talk about the history was just really interesting. One thing I will say though is that Blue, the main character, well, I guess she's one of the main characters, she has some sort of like girl hate sometimes. Like, just there are certain things she says where just, I don't know, like for a girl to dress a certain way, she's like, oh my god, and it's like, shut up. It's just kind of like girl hate stuff, you know, and I didn't love it, but overall I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was just really good. The next book I read was A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, and I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I loved the concept of multiple Londons and how they interact with each other, and then just like, in that case, there's multiple royalties, and it's kind of confusing, but it's also really interesting. I really enjoyed the audiobook, but I think it was a little bit difficult just with the audiobook, because there were a lot of names, and I had a lot of trouble keeping track of all of them, even though that's not usually a problem for me in books. I did have some trouble with that, and I just wasn't fully sucked into the story, not as much as I wanted to be, but overall I did really enjoy it, and I do want to continue with the series. I would also like to continue with, I think it's like Dream of Thieves or something. Next I read New Moon by Stephanie Meyer, and I also have a video of this, and I'll link it up there. I actually read this in 24 hours. I had the audiobook, which really helped with that. Overall, I gave this one 3 stars. I enjoyed it. I mean, it was fun, and I like the movie way better, and I think that's partially because the soundtrack is so good for the movie. And soundtracks really do help a movie out. But I just didn't like this because in the movie, it's a little bit more, you can see why Jacob is like still going after her. You can see where he's coming from, and you can see that she's sort of feeding into it. But in the book, she makes it a lot more obvious. She's like, we are friends, friend zone, friends. But he's still going after her, and it's like, dude, you gotta learn when to stop. And it was just kind of like annoying to read about that. And I really wish Jacob would just give up and they could just be friends, because I think they could have a really great friendship. But no, he's gotta be in love with her. So that's that. Next, I listened to Coraline on audiobook, and Neil Gaiman himself narrated it, which was really interesting. I gave Coraline 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was such a cool concept, and it was very
Coraline?
Mm-hmm. I thought it was such a cool concept, and it was very original and imaginative. When I saw the movie when I was younger, I was totally creeped out by it. Like, I did not like it at all. It creeped me out, and I was like, I'm never reading the book. And then I saw the audiobook, and I was like, oh, it's a pretty short audiobook. And so I listened to it. And it's still creepy, but it's definitely less creepy when you don't have like the visuals there. Even though I could like perfectly imagine it, it was less intense. Next, I read Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. I didn't love this one. I gave it 3 stars. I might give it 2 stars. I don't know. 3 stars for now. It's just, it wasn't my favorite. It also had some pretty racist stuff in it. Like the Indians or the Redskins. It wasn't great. And I also I don't know, I just really couldn't handle how annoying Peter Pan was. Like, he's not a good person. And so it just kind of bothered me, I guess. Overall, it was very interesting and like imaginative, and there was a lot of stuff going on that was cool, but there was also stuff that wasn't, so yeah.
Racist?
Racist?
Why were they being racist?
The author, I don't remember exactly what they were, but it was just like, they made a whole, like, dance, and they were like, let's copy the Indians, and I'm pretty sure they, like, painted on themselves, and they were also giving themselves names. Yeah, there was also some other things, like calling them savages and stuff like that, and it was just like, really? Really? Okay, the next one, I have trouble pronouncing the title, but it's Dear Aegean Way, I think, and it's by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie? I don't know. I'm so sorry if I butchered that. I don't have, like, the whole thing up here. I just have notes. But I liked this a lot. I thought the messages were important, and she had a lot of good points. It was short. I don't really know how to rate this, and I thought it was really, there was a lot of feminist stuff in here. The alternate title is, like, or 15 feminist manifestations or something like that. And it was interesting to see her point of view on things, and, like, that, like, no, you should be a strong woman and stuff like that. And it was really cool to read that, but there were also certain things where I was kind of just like, you know.
What do you mean?
There were just, I can't remember specifically, but there were just certain things that she said. I think she clarified this a little bit later, but at certain points it seemed like being a housewife is bad. It's like, no.
I mean, whatever you want to do, you know?
Yeah, and also you can be a housewife but still be a strong woman.
Yeah.
Next, I read Pride by E.B. Zaboy, and this is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, which I read a couple months back, and it was really cool to read this. I saw when it first came out, and I was really interested in it, but I was like, I gotta wait until I read Pride and Prejudice, and then I completely forgot about it, and then I happened to see it, I think, on Libby, and I was just like, ooh. And it was really cool. I love retellings, especially when the names are a little bit different. Like, Wickham is the name in Pride and Prejudice, but it was Warren here, and just all of the, like, slightly similar names. But this follows the same story as Pride and Prejudice, but it's set in Brooklyn, and it's with a black family, and some neighbors move in across the street to this really fancy new renovated house, and Darcy and Bingley are actually brothers, and, like, both of their last names are Darcy, and then I think Ainsley and I don't remember the other kid's name, but, like, their names were, like, sort of similar, but not quite the same, and there was obviously some stuff that was different considering the fact that it is in the modern age, but it was just really cool to read. I liked all of the subtle differences. There was also some poetry in here, which was really cool, and I listened to this, and Elizabeth Acevedo actually narrates it. Even though it's not her book, she still does an amazing job, and I loved the poetry in here, and just, I really enjoyed that aspect. Next, I read The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. This is Preludes and Nocturnes. This is the first volume. And, yeah, God, there's so much that happened in this book. It's a comic, and it's very much not for children. It's scary. Like, actually scary at some points. But this follows the Sandman. He's captured at, like, the beginning of this, and as a result of that, people are either, like, some people fall into comas, some people can't fall asleep, like, they're just cursed with being awake, and there's some sad stuff in here, like trigger warnings for check the trigger warnings before you going into this, because there's a lot that goes on. Overall, I really enjoyed it. It was sad, but it was just good in general too. I also really liked the goal at the beginning was to capture death and have death, like, do their bidding, but instead they accidentally captured the Sandman, and death and the Sandman are, like, related. And I really like how they portrayed death in here. It's a little bit later in the graphic novel, but I just really liked how they were portrayed. Next, I read Love Boat Taipei, and this was kind of on a whim. It was also on Libby, and I just decided to read it. I really enjoyed it, actually. Like, I understand that there are some things that are, like, it's just not a super great novel. Like, there are some things that aren't great, but I give it 5 stars just off of pure enjoyment. That's just, like, my feelings with it. It was also very nerve-wracking, though, because she was, like, breaking the rules all the time, and it was like, oh my god, you're gonna get caught! And it was just, her mixed feelings on, I don't even remember their names. Like, I think Rick was one of the guys' names. I don't know. The two main dudes, like, her mixed feelings on them and not really sure what's going on, and then, just, I don't know, it was just really fun. I also really liked the dance aspect. She's, like, she likes ballet, but she's also more into, like, modern sort of dance, contemporary, but I just thought that was a really cool aspect, and it, like, reminded me of how much I love dance, and so it kind of, like... Next, I read Dear Martin, which is also a new favorite. I loved this book. I thought it was so well written, and just... It's so hard to articulate, like, the books that you love because you just have so many feelings about them. Let me see what I wrote. I loved reading from his point of view and all of the twists and turns that occurred. It was absolutely mind-boggling to hear Jared speak most of what he did. Oh my god. And that he genuinely believed there was social equality among races. It was interesting to hear his arguments, though, and hear all of the counter-arguments, and just, like that he actually thought some of those things. It was like, wow, okay. It was also interesting to read about how Justice's mom was so against him dating a white girl, even though, like, she made him happy, and the mom was just like, no, she's white. I think there was also good character growth, and this book was, like, almost every character had a good arc and developed in some way. Like, they just learned a little bit more, and they developed more as a person, at least a little bit. Next, I read The Fire Never Goes Out, and this is a graphic novel which I read on my phone, and it was a lot about her. It kind of went chronologically from, I think, like 2011 to 2019, and it's sort of like a memoir but in comics, and it was really cool to read that. She struggles a lot with depression and anxiety, and so it was interesting to see her write comics about that, and, or actually, I don't know if she struggles from anxiety. I feel like she did. I may be getting that wrong. But I loved the comics because they were very simple, but they spoke a lot on their own. I also liked how there were basically like photocopies of sticky notes and pieces of paper that she drew on or wrote on that were inserted into the book. It was cool. Next, I read The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I really enjoyed this book. It was really interesting to read. It was, I listened to it on audiobook. I loved the story so much. I loved all the different layers and how there was like a star version too, and she had to figure out how to handle that, and it was just really interesting. And I watched the movie a couple days ago. It's quite different in certain ways, and I didn't like all of the changes that were made because I really enjoyed the book, and so there were certain things that changed that I didn't want to. The next book I read was Black Women in History by Charlotte Christensen, sorry. And I believe she's an artist, and so that's what this mostly focuses on. There's like art and then a little paragraph sort of describing the women. And it's kind of crazy that out of 9 women represented in this book, I only recognized 2. A lot of the ones represented here were firsts in something. Like, I didn't even recognize the name of the first Black female astronaut, which is just crazy, you know? It just feels like something that I should know, or everyone should know. I will say there were quite a few spelling errors in here, and just typos as far as like past tense, present tense, but it didn't matter to me that much. Like, I got the idea, and the art, I think, is really what you're focusing on. So those were all of the books that I read in June. I did get about 50% into Lovely War, although I still have not finished it. I'm just a little bit past 50% at the moment. Let me know if you guys have read any of these books and if you had any similar or differing opinions, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and I hope you have an amazing day. I will see you next time.